Good morning, everybody. It is good to see you. I hope you are safe. I hope you are well. And I hope you're all, how shall I say, enjoying the easing of the restrictions as we start to move from the last tricky 3 months into what I hope will be business and life as normal. My name is Shil Shanghavi. I'm the founder of Chatterbox Public Speaking, and I am delighted to be your host, your MC, and your facilitator for this morning's webinar. Now, before we kick off, wherever you are, for us in Australia, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land and pay my respects to their elders past, present, and future. Now, every time I host a webinar, every time I am the MC for a webinar, there's one thing that I'm very conscious of, and that is you, the attendees, can see us. You can see the speaker and myself. However, we can't see you. We know you're there, however, we can't see you. And so for us, it can be quite a surreal exercise simply speaking to a screen. And so it's nice for us to know that you're there and that you're interested and you're involved in the conversation. So I like to ask questions just to kick things off, to make sure that you are there, you are participating, and a few of you have told us where you are, which is great. But there's something else I would like to know. Now, as you're all aware, in the last 3 months, we've been going through a rather tricky and surreal time, which I don't think anybody was expecting. And so in this time, we've all adapted and done things in our own ways. And so I'd love to know, while we've been going through this period, what's the one thing you have done for your business to ensure you remain strong and relevant? Have you adapted your offer? Have you stayed exactly the same? Have you tweaked and changed slightly? Have you scaled back? But I'd love to hear your thoughts. So if you could please just once again pop into the chat column, what's one thing you've done for yourselves or for your businesses to remain strong, to remain relevant, and to see you through the past 3 months? I would love to hear your thoughts. So once again, could you drop them into the chat, please? And I'll just give you a minute to do this. And your responses will then build some of the things we talk about in our Q&A. So I would love to hear your thoughts, please. The regular contact, absolutely. That's a really important thing to do. And I think for all businesses, whatever line of work you're in, regular contact and communication is so important, not only to your team, but to your clients as well. So thank you very much for that. I've done the same thing in that I've stayed in touch with all my clients via Zoom. To Alan, yes, your Zoom meetings, it's so much more productive. And I took a decision to take risks, to try things which I normally wouldn't try. And look, I'll be honest, like everybody else, it has been tough. However, I used the period to refine ideas I have and to build on the projects which I started to put off for such a long time. Daljit, I love the motivating employees because I think it's so important at this time to motivate the people we work with. And thank you so much for your responses there. The reason I asked it is because today we're going to talk about rebuilding a business, which I think is so important at the moment because we're coming out of something so unprecedented and something so tough that it's important to look at the future. It's important to assess where we are and where we would like to move to. And so in order to do that, we have an expert speaker who is, I'm going to say, a master at strategizing and how to not just build, but how to rebuild a business. Now, when I first met Dinesh, I remember standing in his reception, and behind me there was a wall, and on this wall was a beautiful timeline, which he aptly calls a legacy timeline. And this timeline depicts the journey which everybody would go through during the course most people would go through during the course of your life, from the moment you're born to high school, to university, buying a house, having a family, getting a job, and all those things. And it's a beautiful way to depict the journey we all take towards building our legacy. However, he realized there was one piece of this timeline which was missing, and he's aptly called that extraordinary events. And I think it's such a timely, it's such a timely thing to talk about, because what we have gone through is an extraordinary event. And so to talk about how to plug that extraordinary event gap in the timeline and how to rebuild your business, we have a person who is one of Australia's most successful entrepreneurs and the business people. In fact, he has a list of awards that is so long, going back to 2012, that it would take me an extra 10 minutes just to read all the awards he has. So I'm not going to go through the whole lot. However, what I will say is this. In the last week, he was awarded the Boutique Advisor of the Year around Australia in the category of 20 plus employees. And get this, it was out of, I believe it was 12,000 applications. So it is an outstanding achievement, especially when you consider what we're going through at the moment. He's the managing director of Fortuna Advisory Group. And so will you please give a warm virtual welcome to my friend, Dinesh Aggarwal. Oh, it's over to you, Dinesh.
It's January 2021. We've just finished celebrating Christmas Day with our loved ones. We've entered the new year with a bang, and we've forgotten about 2020 and put everything behind us. But have we? The big question in front of us is whether the new normal world post COVID-19 looks the same for us. Perhaps not. When I look back at 2020, it reminds me of the infographic in our reception, Shil, you just mentioned about it. We have a legacy timeline, which shows various milestones in our clients' lives, which we are very accustomed to looking at. On a close inspection, and given the events over 2020, I now realize that there's a missing piece, a piece which I call extraordinary events, and which I think we need to include that in our legacy timeline. As the extraordinary events of 2020 occurred, Fortuna quickly adapted, transitioning its team to work from home, but we also geared ourselves to help our clients to the best of our ability. During this time, we made various observations with our clients, and we realized that in order to look forward into the future and manage these extraordinary events, we all have a choice as a business. And the choice we have is to either reposition, pivot, or collaborate. Now, there has been a lot of talk about these three terms lately, and it's very important that we put this into context to understand what these terms really mean. And I'd like to start by sharing an example on how to reposition. I was talking to one of my clients, Bob, who runs a chain of restaurants with a strong brand presence in the market. With the lockdown, Bob had to shut down all his restaurants. We were sitting and evaluating his numbers from the cash flow perspective, assessing how could he sustain all his permanent staff and family, taking into consideration any government benefits or stimuluses available. We started assessing the feasibility of running his restaurants just on purely takeaways, online orders, deliveries on Ubers, etc. And I explained to Bob, I said, your numbers perfectly stack up. You just need to reposition your business in the market and convey the message that you are open for takeaways, pickups, deliveries, and just start changing your message accordingly. Now, it was very important for Bob to understand what repositioning in business means and how it correlates the whole brand repositioning exercise. And essentially, when a company changes its brand status in the marketplace, which typically could include changes to the marketing mix, such as product, price, promotion. As repositioning is done to keep up with the consumer wants and needs. Now, as Bob understood how this whole thing applies to him, he took 3 essential steps to reposition. He assessed his cash flow. He evaluated the market and the need and the opportunities that are available. And then he assessed the feasibility to operate purely on takeaways and reposition himself in the marketplace. Now, Bob was very excited about the whole strategy and immediately started working on his marketing message and the platforms he's going to use to successfully implement this. Now, Bob was not confused anymore with how this term has lately been interchangeably been used with the word pivot. Now, this brings me to another example. Coincidentally, at the same time, I was working with my another client, Peter, who's running a very successful food catering business. He has an established supply chain built up over the years and a large team and a fleet of vehicles to run his operations. Peter had to suddenly come to a standstill because of this lockdown. Peter was distressed as he would have to stand down, retrench all his staff who have been with him for many, many years. And how is he going to survive with his family, with the school-going children, and the mortgages and the business loans? Peter and I deliberated on some ideas and quickly realized that we can work with this very well-established supply chain and resources, which he can use to his advantage if he just pivots his business model. We discussed that in order to pivot, Peter can immediately take the following 3 steps. First, he can adjust his target market and supply chain and start the wholesale of essential items which are in demand during this phase. Second, he has all the platforms to make this happen. He just needs to strategize how to use these platforms. Third, he has a very strong brand and digital marketing strategy which he can leverage to penetrate very, very quickly. So for Peter, there was a fundamental change to his business, which typically is what pivot is all about. So pivot is essentially a shift in the strategy and was first introduced by an entrepreneur, Eric Ries, and has been used as a management principle for many, many years. Now, the hardest part of entrepreneurship is to develop the judgment to know when is the time to change the direction and when it's time to stay on course. Starbucks started by selling espresso machines. Twitter was a platform for finding podcasts. And Nintendo produced all sorts of different things, such as vacuum cleaners. Just by changing the focus, they were able to pivot into successful companies we know them of today. Now, sometimes, how a pivoting or repositioning may not be possible, and we need to look at other ways to capitalize on the potential opportunities. If this is the case, it's worth looking at people around us, which means tapping into our networks to explore the collaborations. If repositioning and pivoting isn't possible, we need to ask ourselves whether the businesses in future can or will collaborate more to tap into these right opportunities by using the right ecosystems. Now, we all know traditionally large and established players are used to just doing it alone. They'll continue to increase the scale of the business by investing in new products or diversification. Their preferred approach will often be to try out new things in-house or buy another company in order to enter a new space in the market and just continue to expand. However, there are two considerations a business should assess under the collaboration model. First, we actively participate in shaping the new landscape. To this end, many leading companies are building their own collaborative network or joining some existing ones to ask yourself if you are able to contribute and actively participate. Secondly, you should evaluate your risk. Now, extraordinary events remind us how challenging the things can get when you're faced with unforeseen circumstances and we have to scale back in the emergencies. So conduct a risk assessment and evaluate the potential risks of collaborating as well. Once you've assessed the risk and the landscape, now you can expand on to the collaboration model by creating those ecosystems, because that will optimize value and will confer a competitive edge. Now, an ecosystem developed through collaboration approach has three distinct advantages in my view. The first advantage, a lot of businesses have their own niche, and they can bolt on to an existing ecosystem and rapidly penetrate into these new markets. The second advantage, the company who's developed the ecosystem keeps achieving the scale and much larger brand and market presence without having to invest so much capital in the development of these new products. And third advantage is that ultimately a great share of profits for everyone is generally a derivative of strong brand and market presence rather than just the manufacturing of the products itself. Now, a very good example of this is zero counting software, which rapidly penetrated in the Australian market in the last 5 years and taken a major share of market from the traditional and a long-term player, MYOB. Over the years, now Zero has developed a strong ecosystem and where a lot of new add-on keeps emerging to provide better tools for the accounting industry and the businesses to meet their unique needs, and hence enable them to focus on the real value-adding services and the work. If we look ahead, in today's connected world where geographic boundaries are meaningless and the collaboration is different than what most businesses are traditionally used to, we have access to a global reach, across industry focus, flexible deal structures, and ongoing research and development programs. Today's collaboration models are more adaptable, designed to respond more quickly to the evolving demand patterns and customer preferences. Forward-looking companies that can capitalize on the power of this collaboration, I think, can reap enormous benefits and are better positioned for an uncertain future. So if you take these three strategies I've discussed into consideration, what can you do to adjust and better prepare for these extraordinary events? I'd like to suggest you taking the following three-step approach. Remodel. Now, whether it is through pivot or repositioning, or whether through collaboration, you can create new opportunities for your business. And while you do so, assess any potential risks associated. That brings me to my second point, de-risking. You must stretch your imagination to consider any new emerging risks, especially if you want to stay in the game for long, by preparing appropriate risk mitigation strategies. Not even Google or Apple of the world, who are the front runners in innovation, could plan for events like COVID-19. But now they change their thinking on de-risking their businesses in a different way. And speaking of unplanned, who would have thought that all our meetings would be from home on Zoom? Which brings to my third point, the virtual world. A lot of us have been forced into this new virtual world. If you were shying away from this before, my guess is you've either now learned to operate in this environment or have decided to retire. Change is the reality and the key characteristic of our Mother Nature. Let's not run away from it. Now, as we all think about the way forward to 2021, I urge you to go back and critically assess your business and ask yourself, are you seeing any opportunities which you can collaborate on? Are you continuously assessing your business if it needs any remodeling? And how are you rewriting your timeline to create your legacy? Thank you.
Thank you, Dinesh. That was interesting, and it covered so many different strategies and aspects of things that we can do. And I mean, the notes I have on here are I'm going to pick your brain a lot more after this conversation. I hope you realize. So
Yeah,
thank
sure.
you for your insights into that. But just to recap, so the three main strategies which you're suggesting, which you're talking about, is to pivot, to reposition, and to collaborate. Is that right?
Exactly.
Yep. So and then off those three strategies, you assess which one's best for you, and then you start to rebuild your business if that is the case, based on one of those three strategies, right?
Yeah. So if you are in that rebuilding kind of position scenario, or you take inspiration for those models and continue to innovate your business.
Yeah, that's great. Look, we have a question from Delgitian and I'm just going to read this question out word for word. How do you rebuild a business of packaged drinking water for a business that is dependent on the hospitality business? I'll repeat the question.
Yeah.
How do you rebuild a business of packaged drinking water when your business is dependent on the hospitality industry?
Very good question. I mean, I presume if hospitality business is really struggling, then any ancillary industry is going to suffer because their whole market has been jeopardized. While I presume if you take one of my examples I've discussed about the supply chain, you are in a packaging industry, you're dealing with plastic, to some extent, where you can think of moving into manufacturing masks. That's probably a perfect example I can think of. You've got the infrastructure, you might have the factory, you just might need a couple of new machines, and hope you don't import it from China, but just maybe think of where else you can get it. But yeah, you can convert your packaging infrastructure into maybe perhaps making masks, because and their market opens up, because it's not just the hospitality then you've got a wider market you can supply to. And that would be a pivot situation.
Sure. That's an example of how to pivot. You know, there's a couple of people I know in Perth who operate gyms, and one example in particular stands out where there's a gentleman that owns a gym. He's actually a friend of mine, and obviously with what has happened, they've had to close down for 3 months now, which has affected their ability to do business. And
Yeah.
so strategy which he took was, just because the gym was closed, it doesn't mean he couldn't rent equipment. And so he started to rent equipment from the gym. Obviously, it was all cleaned. They went through all the protocols to make sure they were sanitized and cleaned and so forth. However, he started to rent that equipment out. And I thought it was quite a smart thing to do, just to keep some sort of income flowing.
Yeah.
And off the back of that, so that's, I would love to hear your thoughts firstly on that. What sort of a strategy would you call that?
I think that's repositioning, because you're using, you kind of not maneuvering into a new business environment or a new business model to sell a different product or a service, but you just reposition with your existing status into the market. And a similar example is like how I was working with a couple of my clients who are in personal training space, and are associated with the gyms. So they reposition themselves to offer the same service online on Zoom, because they have their clientele. They can't go to the gym, but they've got a little bit of an equipment infrastructure at home, or they could, quickly tailor or prepare themselves by having that sort of facility available at home. And the personal trainers were running those classes online, and some of them they could run even group classes online, because everyone just logs in from their own home on Zoom, and the class can be run perfectly in a similar way. So you just reposition with your existing service.
Yeah. And it's an example of how to reposition. And so let's just stay on the gym and the fitness industry and apply the principles to other industries. There are others I know who own and operate a gym or who work in the fitness industry. However, they've gone off into a different game completely. So their mentality has been, we have a membership base of 200, 300, 400, whatever that number is. And so because we're not able to function anymore in the fitness industry, let's shift over to operating a cafe, or let's all of a sudden start to become a presentation expert, which I think is a bit strange. However, I have seen it happen. What are your thoughts when you've made such a radical change from what you've been doing for so long to changing completely, all in a short amount of time?
Well, it's a perfect example of a pivot, because you just thinking of an idea is how you're going to use your existing infrastructure. If you got a lot of capital invested in your infrastructure, whether that's equipment, human resources, other things, you think of a different business model, because you can use that to enter into a different market, to offer a different product, to offer a different service. So you pivoting the model with your existing infrastructure to enter in a different business model and tap a new market available to you.
Yep. Now look, I'm going to ask you, and I'm going to preface this by saying I'm going to ask you a bit of a curveball question here, and I feel I can, because let's face it, you've won so many awards that I think you'll be able to take a bit of a curveball question. So it's okay to do this.
Bring it on.
So I noticed Colin, whilst he hasn't asked the question, he works in construction, and I used to work in construction for about 10 years, Colin. So I understand the space, and I'm still in touch with quite a few people who work in the construction space. And so it has slowed down. Yes, it's going to pick up again. However, it has slowed down quite a bit. So what's the single best piece of advice? So what's the one thing you would recommend to people who work in commercial construction, say, as a way to ride this out? And perhaps what sort of strategies can they start to look at into the future?
I think the construction industry have perfect opportunities for collaboration. I mean, it's a very broad service set which is put together in a construction industry. So if you're a builder, I mean, to some extent, I mean, there's some big builders who've got the full infrastructure and all the trades to be able to do the full job of building a house. But most often, middle level small builders, they have a team or contractors with different trade skills, to put together, the build of a house. Now, if you're in a construction industry, it's slowed down. You probably need to see what are the skill sets you've got, what are the infrastructure you've got available, depending on if you are a full-fledged builder or you were providing a service, on certain elements of that building or construction industry. So, again, the scaling is a perfect example, as I gave earlier, because, especially in that extraordinary circumstances when it's slowing down, your scale is not going to work very, perfectly, because the competitive forces are gonna kill it. So, you collaborate, you rearrange, you create an ecosystem, or you bolt on to an ecosystem quickly, because those niche kind of skills or niche services which you might have, there is going to be a need of that in the market. You just you need to just have those conversations with other people in your similar situation, and rescale yourself and collaborate to create a different type of an ecosystem.
Sure. Well, on the note of collaboration, it's a key strategy which you talk about. Excuse me. It's a key strategy which you talk about. However, how do you look for collaboration opportunities? Because it's not, collaboration isn't the sort of thing where you can simply jump onto Google and type it in and start to collaborate. To build a partnership, to build a collaboration, to build that ecosystem, as you spoke about, there must be a process involved in it. And so, if you run a small business, what advice would you give to somebody who is looking to collaborate? Because, as I said, it's not a question of Google type and collaboration occurs. There must be a process involved. So could you talk us through what that process is?
How many coffees can you have? So, I mean, have as many coffees as you can. It's all about growing your connections, and within that network, you'll see a lot of opportunities. Sometimes we just don't keep our eyes and ears open. We just need to continue to have those dialogues with the people around us, and never say never, right? So the collaboration opportunities are in your backyard, right? It's just, you need to have those dialogues, those conversations with an open mind, right?
Sure.
Because you are operating in a SME market, you're operating in a small segment, okay? But you could be in a software industry, you are a small player in a software industry. You might not have the strength to create your own ecosystem, but, have a look around, see there are some ecosystems. Can you develop something which is material enough to bolt onto that ecosystem? Or if you are looking at very small scale level, as I know we talk about, example of construction as well, but in collaboration, so you look around all your connections, have that dialogue, have that conversation. I think as the ideas flow on, you'll develop a model which is going to come out of a collaborative approach.
Sure. Well, look, I completely agree with you. How many coffees can you have? It has been difficult to have coffees over the last, well, it's been impossible to have a coffee over the last 3 months. And so if you don't mind me just putting my input into this as well, I feel a lot of people think that in order to have a conversation, you need to have a face-to-face coffee. In order to network, you need to be out and about in person. However, I've found there are so many the webinars and calls, just like the one we're having today, where they're free. You get to chat, you get to network, you get to meet with potential people. And so I feel doing things like this is a great way to network. It's a great way to meet people. It's a great way to, to build your connection base. And then through things like this, even though it's online, it's still an opportunity to find collaboration opportunities and partnerships. Don't you think?
Exactly. That's
Yeah.
that's perfect.
Look, I work in the sort of industry where I depend on being in front of people. My livelihood depends on doing workshops and presenting, and so I've done the strategy. I've done the strategy shift where it's been online for the last 3 months. In fact, I've delivered more online talks in the last 3 months than my entire life, and I've had a ball doing it because I haven't had to leave my room, and it's been amazing to do this. However, through the process, I've signed up to webinars and I've signed up to all these online events. And through the process, I've met so many interesting people in Australia and internationally, which has led to so many fantastic collaborations, which in turn builds my network, which in turn creates that ecosystem, which in turn leads to a brighter future. So I completely agree with the collaboration. And I think it's important to look for those opportunities.
Of course, yes.
You mentioned about being a judge. So as in having the judgment to know when the right time to make a move is. How do you know? And you mentioned the likes of Starbucks and Twitters, which we all know, they're big brands, they're global brands. However, to the majority of us, it's impossible to compare the scale of a Twitter, a Nintendo, or a Starbucks because they're so big. There's David and Goliath. And so from our perspective, from the David perspective, when is the right time to make that judgment call? Can you give us an insight into that? Because it can be quite a difficult thing to make a call as to now's the best time to do it.
See, I mean, there's an opportunity to learn in every situation or under any circumstances. Sometimes, even during this time, there's been a lot of businesses who've been, extremely busy and they were struggling handling their growth, and they, if you ask them the question, or some of them, I've heard these comments. Okay, well, I mean, if this doesn't affect me. I mean, how does remodeling mean anything to me during this time? So, but we just don't stop growing, or we perhaps stop growing if we close ourselves from the learning process, right? I mean, if you look at the business schools, they teach you the live case studies of successful companies, and no success comes without going through those hardships. So we only see the front of those big successful companies, but we haven't gone into the stories behind that, because they haven't started as billion-dollar companies, right? So we are focusing on the learning. So ignore the scale and focus on the learning, right? What hardships they've gone through. Because we only get to know when they're already a very successful company. Perhaps we wouldn't have known that this, they started selling vacuum cleaners or X, Y, Z, right? So if we are developing a new business, or we're handling growth in our existing business, you don't lose anything by learning from the experience of the others, because that may open new doors which you've never thought before. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, look, it does, and I'm smiling as you said that. So excuse the smile on my face, but the reason I am is because I was actually talking to somebody about this over a coffee when I said, now with I wouldn't say with the emergence, but with the explosion of things like the Instagrams, the LinkedIns, the Twitters, the Facebook, people now have a platform to showcase their work and what they do. Yeah. And I made a comment that people see a highlight reel on things like your LinkedIn. Let's talk about that for just a minute, because that is the professional platform where we we network. It's also a great platform to build your ecosystems and partnerships and collaborations. So I think it ties into this. However, a lot of people see the fun things. They see the shiny things out of it. They see the webinar. They see the awards which you've won. They see the wonderful things which you've done. However, they don't see the hard work which happens behind the scenes. They don't see the stress you go to. They don't see the number of times you speak to a client and they say, no, we don't want to engage you, or whatever it is, but people only see the fun stuff.
Exactly. And perhaps, sorry to cut you there, Shil, but there's no one better than you who can tell when you are on a stage, the public sees only once your presentation, your speech, your talk. But you don't realize how many rehearsals or how many sort of nerve-wracking moments you've gone through behind the stage. Like it's exactly the same thing.
Correct, yes. And it's a timely reminder that no matter how prepared you are, things can still go wrong.
Yes.
Put into it. And today is a great example. We've spoken about embracing technology and adjusting strategies and the pivots and the collaborations. However, you simply being, I believe you're standing in your bar at the moment. Is that right?
I thought you were not going to mention it.
I think it's appropriate to mention it because it is 11:15 in Perth in the morning and Dinesh is standing in his bar without a drink, I might add. However, it's an interesting thing because when the intention of our call was to have your background, and very quickly through, despite all the preparation you have been through, it didn't work. And so even today, in some ways, is an example of how you've had to pivot to adjust to the situation, isn't it?
Yes, that's right. So if we have any Irish people logged into the webinar, they can see I've got the famous temple bar.
I think it adds some flavor to our conversation. It's a fun thing to add into the conversation. Look, when it comes to remodeling, right? How and part of your presentation also spoke about the risks. So assessing the risks. However, how can you remodel or de-risk to explore opportunities? Because it can be quite a disruptive exercise, can it not? So what can you do to assess and remodel without disrupting what you do? Because we've all been through such a disruptive phase that the last thing anybody in any industry would want to do is add more disruption to their line of work. Can you share your thoughts on that, please?
Yeah, you're exactly right, Shil, that it can be very disruptive if you keep remodeling your business. But if you look from a different angle, that's what innovation is. If you stop exploring yourself and your business and don't critically assess, you stop innovation in your business. So don't look at it from that angle that you kind of continuously rejigging it. Remodeling is linked to innovation. So if you don't want to stop growing, you need to keep innovating, which means you have to keep remodeling. And as I gave an example of Starbucks, Twitter, and Nintendo, and many more like that through their corporate journeys are an example. And even in our sort of backyard or in our neighborhood, if you look at, you'll find many more examples like that. So the way I see it is, it is innovation. So if you breed innovation in your business, you wouldn't even realize when have you remodeled into a different environment.
Yeah, and then let's talk about that word innovation. It's a word which gets used a lot. Most companies say they're innovative and they've got the best people and they're the most innovative in their particular industry. Now, for some, the word innovation can come across as, to be an innovator, you've got to actually start something. You have to develop a product or develop an idea. I know for myself, that's the term, that's the association I have with that word.
Yeah.
But in the case, is it? To be an innovator of your business or your industry, it doesn't mean you've got to be the person who starts an Apple phone or an iPod or
it often gets misconceived as a term used in the startup industry, that you have to come up with some sort of innovation and invention So invention and innovation are not the same thing, or that's not the same meaning of the different terms. So
Yes.
to understand, it's not an invention for when you talk about innovation and you're starting up something or a new product, or it is your sort of it's a continuous evolution in your business journey. And it comes in different shapes and form. It could be innovation in your systems. It could be innovation on developing the culture. Yeah, it could be innovation in your market research. It could be innovation in how you serve your customers, the journey. So, you could be disruptive by being innovative, right? You don't have to be just, like a startup. You could be disruptive by at any phase of your business journey.
Correct. And I hope you don't mind me including this into the conversation. However, you came along to my event just last week, and it just feels appropriate to mention this in the theme of innovation. I introduced a service offering, a new service offering, and I don't believe it's not an innovative product. However, the thought behind it, I believe, fits into what you're describing at the moment, where I had an idea, I've taken something existing and I've put the existing concept with the idea I have, and I've now brought that to the market. And so is it possible for the attendees on this call, whatever line of work you are in, from sports to construction to water, is it possible to assess your business, assess the risk, have a look at what you currently do, have a look at other things that are being done in the market, and then through that collaboration, through that ecosystem, finding ways to then innovate and accelerate what you already do? Does that make sense?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and that's what, from your example from that event, what you launched as, a virtual reality product in the public speaking industry, like, you just creating a different platform where you can deliver the same service, and at the same time, new learning opportunities for the people, which can have a wider reach. So, it's just, you've innovated in a way to reach a wider market, and at the same time provide an opportunity to a lot of people who may have that sort of stigma on going in front of hundreds of people to practice or deliver a speech. So
Correct.
And then collaboration approach. I mean, so any of these models, can be adapted to bring innovation in your business. So extraordinary events may have prompted a lot of people to think differently, but at the end of the day, they're not new principles, right? It's just that you are not conscious of them.
Correct. And look, I'd like to shift gears slightly. It's been a lot of the talk in the last 3 months has been, for lack of a better word, negative. It's been sad, it's been down. However, there have been plenty of success stories. There have been people who've been doing well. There are businesses that are booming, that are thriving because they've collaborated, because they've they've done the pivot, they've done the reposition, and so it's worked. And so for some of the businesses, they're going through growth and they haven't really been affected much by what's going on. And so if you are a business that's experiencing growth, if you are a business that's been doing well and it's reached the point where you're struggling to keep up with the growth, are there still opportunities to collaborate, to pivot, to reposition? And what do you do to handle that growth?
Well, there definitely is, because if you've got that opportunity, or if you're in a position where you can't handle your growth, you're going to end up in a position where you're not able to manage that or scale it down, or eventually, it can have a negative impact on the business. But because let's say if it's a capacity issue, because sometimes the growth in the business, you think that you can continue to handle by keep on increasing your human resource strength, but maybe the model of the business is that, it still doesn't work because the whole pyramid is not perfectly aligned to manage, or even the business owner is not able to cope up with it. You need to think in that instance that how do you take it to the next level where you still maintain, your as a business owner as your wealth or as your capital in that business so that it doesn't start shrinking. So sometimes so collaboration is only when it's not only when you're looking up to a bigger business to say, okay, how can I collaborate with this bigger business to succeed? But sometimes the bigger businesses in that instance say, well, I need to now convert this growth giant into an ecosystem, and so that it can run on itself, and you create an environment where it's a strong pyramid system where it will work, and then the other people can collaborate or bolt onto that system to give you that leverage, to give you that infrastructure, to give you that support. It's just how you look at that opportunity.
Which is what you have done for Fortuna, right? These strategies are things which you yourself have implemented, and a testimony. It's a testimony to your success, to the amount of awards that you and your business and your team have won, and all the accolades which you've received over the years, and all of this it's all part of your legacy. It's all part of that timeline which you spoke about in the beginning of your presentation as well, right? Could you, for the people on this call who I gave a very short snippet of what the timeline is, but I think it's fascinating, and I think what you've created there and the concept which you've created there ties back into everything you've spoken about today so well. So for those who've never been to your office and who've never seen this timeline, could you describe what the inspiration behind the timeline was and where it's come from?
I mean, I suppose it kind of links back to any business owner's journey. I mean, you're inspired by events that occur in your life, and you learn from them, and there's certain things, your thinking perhaps evolve based on those incidents. So I've always believed in creating a legacy and not just a business, because that legacy would tend to continue irrespective of me being involved in the business or not. So whether that's the team and the future generation and the future leaders of that business who will be inspired and will to continue that legacy. So I've never had an intention to build on a business to create a lot of value and sell and have a lot of capital. It's that journey where not only for our clients who are sort of working with us intergenerational, it's our team, it's our staff working with us intergenerational, whether so it's just that inspiration to create something which is much bigger and beyond myself.
Yeah, that's great. Well, thank you very much, Dinesh. Just to recap to everybody, so the three core strategies which you've gone through today in order to rebuild your business involves repositioning, pivoting, and collaborating. And in doing so, it involves expanding your networks, involves essentially stepping out of your comfort zone, trying things, reaching out to your networks, and assessing the risks which could impact your business, and then making the right judgment call as to how best to take your business into the future. You spoke about embracing technology, embracing the ability to now to leverage and talk to people all over the world, because we are no longer bound by the boundaries which we've got. So we've got the ability to do all these things. And so I think your insights today have been fantastic. Can I also ask, will this be recorded, and will the recording be sent out to all the attendees as well?
Definitely, but Michelle, it's being recorded. So it'll take us a few days to prepare the recording to be available as on our online resources, and this will be circulated to all the attendees, and it would also be available on our resource page for viewing by other clients and businesses.
Amazing. Amazing. Well, we are at the end of our time. So just before we leave, Dinesh, is there anything else you would like to tell everybody who's attended today? Any last parting words, perhaps?
I would say that just always look for opportunities. Just there is an opportunity in every situation. So rather than just keep being demotivated because of the environment and the circumstances, think differently, look for opportunities, have more coffees, have collaborative approach. I mean, the world we are living in, or we're moving towards a future, it's going to be all about collaboration. So keep that approach open.
Thank you very much, Dinesh. And if coffee isn't your thing, you can swap it over to tea. I personally like having a peppermint tea because I can't do 20 coffees in a day.
Yeah, maybe.
Thank you very much for tuning in from all over Australia, from all over the world. It's been brilliant having you. I've had a great time. Thank you very much for listening to myself as well. And with that, we've hit the time we're meant to knock off. And so have an amazing day. Look forward to the future. And remember, pivot, reposition, or collaborate. Have a wonderful day. Have a wonderful week and a weekend. And we will speak to you soon. Thank you
so much, Shil. I'd like to thank you for facilitating this talk and hosting this morning. And thank all the attendees, and wish you all the best. Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.